Alright. Let's settle down. It's just crypto. I'm Just, but my mama call me Justin. Welcome to another DFK video. Possibly long awaited, definitely long overdue. Now that my computer is up and running again, I want to restart my class guide series. A few days after the release of Seer, I did a guide on that. I want to upgrade that kind of at the end, but right now I want to start with the Knight. I think that's a logical place to start. It's one of the original 3 heroes we got, so everybody knows a lot about the Knight. I just want to do a deep dive on it for some things you may not have thought about yet, as we are all building better and better Knights to use in the hunts and potentially use in PvP coming up. I'll take a quick moment to establish the structure of this series. First, I want to talk about the primary role of each and every class and how we can actively build our heroes to perform that role via stat allocation, via equipment selection, as well as skill selection for each hunt. I have more or less narrowed it down to what I use 100% of the time. And then at the end of the video, we want to do some speculation on what may or may not be important for each class in terms of the initial PvP rollout. But first, let's break down the Knight in terms of its role. Broadly speaking, in these 3 to 4 party member turn-based strategy games, I think you could simplify roles down to 3 possibilities: tank, damage dealer, support. And based on what we've seen so far from DFK, I think that is applicable. And hey, the Knight's an easy one. A lot of these are convoluted. You can be kind of tank, kind of damage dealer, kind of support, whatever. This guy's a tank. The Knight wants to sit in P1. He wants to absorb damage, utilizing his physical defense to receive less damage, and then utilizing his high HP pool to receive efficient percentage-based healing, such as a health vial, and hopefully not die. Or at the very least, not die until it's time to die, contributing to a greater good. And we're not just arbitrarily deciding that our Knight is a tank. There are some underlying mechanics that the devs have put into place that make it a very natural fit. Firstly, the most likely stats that a Knight is going to level up are both defensive in nature, vitality and endurance. Secondly, the Knight is going to get a large HP pool bonus on 50% of its level ups, which is the highest possible in the game. Only the Paladin and Dread Knight can do a little bit better in terms of HP. As with most classes, but even more so with the Knight, we want vitality early and often. With any luck, we'll hit a lot of large bonuses and have an unstoppable juggernaut by the time we want to use our Knight in combat. But that is RNG. Some Knights are going to get too many small bonuses, too many medium bonuses, and that could be a potential problem. We do not want to build a Knight of Summer when winter is coming. The other advantage to having a high vitality hero is that every turn they have a chance to recover from a status effect currently in place. Knight is going to be much better than most at doing this. If we're able to get rid of a bleed, get rid of a hunter's mark, get rid of whatever, stun, that is definitely going to help us win the fight. And secondly, I wanted to talk about endurance, a perhaps misunderstood or undervalued stat, but hopefully I can clear a little bit of that up with the Knight. I think it's the most applicable for the Knight for the classes we have so far, because the Knight starts with heavy armor. Reason being, heavy armor has the highest raw physical defense and the highest physical defense scalar, which is completely dependent on our endurance. I'm not going to go into the formulas and break it all down, but let's suffice it to say that if you have a large raw physical defense, and then multiply it by a larger scalar based on your endurance, your physical defense that you end up with is going to be significantly higher than if you had light armor, for example, and then a low scalar, which is why when I'm shopping for Bach Knight armor, I tend to focus on the multiplier for endurance. Push percentage, pull percentage, whatever. Let's play into our strengths, which is high endurance growth stat. And once you've played enough of these void hunts, you really start to notice a difference when you have a Knight in front, properly geared and ready to get hit. They just take significantly less damage. They need less healing. They make you more efficient in some ways. Additionally, endurance is what affects your status effect resistance. So every time there is potential for you to get bleed damage or dazed or repositioned, which are some of the likely occurrences in the void hunts, your hero gets, in D&D terms, kind of a saving throw, which is the chance to resist it based on endurance. So that's what the Knight is good at, stacking up those 2 stats passively, creating a better than average HP pool, physical defense, status effect resistance, and the possibility of recovery. So what can we do actively to improve our Knights? All the stuff I described before are kind of, like I said, dev decisions. They just kind of happen to all Knights. But we can control which stone we use, which crystal we use to level up, and what stats we select while leveling up. Generally speaking, I want all my stats on my Knights to go in either strength, vitality, endurance, and then dexterity as well. While strength is a slightly lower growth stat for the Knight than vitality or endurance, I really want to do as much damage as possible, which is not that much, but it's going to be a lot less if you don't put points in strength. I really want all my abilities to work when I use them because the Knight is not that fast. You might as well make use of all the turns you get. So I don't think you could ever fault somebody for using a vitality stone to summon. If this hero is doing so, what I think I would do is do strength as the main every level with a strength crystal. I would use vitality as a secondary up until around level 10. Maybe you do level 8, level 12, whatever, it's up to you. It is more of a gamble to skimp out on vitality, But there is a reward for that gamble. If you can stop putting points into vitality because you're up above 20 as soon as possible, you can start going back into dexterity and endurance. In fact, I do equivocate them in terms of importance. So if one level I'm doing endurance and then the next level I'll do dexterity. If this hero had used a strength or dexterity stone or endurance stone instead, I don't think I would fault you for starting off with vitality first. Maybe going this formation, alternating between endurance and dexterity, until you get up above 20 vitality, which is usually going to be level, 7 or 8. And then once I got to that point, I would switch back over to strength and then just do endurance and dex the entire time. So let's talk about dex. We see this is a pretty old hero, Bard Skullbreath, 5-digit crystal veil number. And I leveled this hero up before hunts were a thing. You may notice that it has 12 dexterity at level 11. And if you have ever had the misfortune of playing with such a knight, it's pretty rough. You're looking at 80%, maybe. High 70s perhaps, which is why with my new knights that aren't going to pit, like Bard, Earmost Bard, is fix our error, and despite the fact that we have a poor dex growth stat, we can still put our secondary points in there around every other level, which is what I try to do. You may have noticed a little bit ago that block is actually determined by dex. Knights start with a shield, they start with a one-handed weapon, they can only ever equip one-handed weapons, which means they're always going to be wearing a shield. So any extra amount of block is very welcome. Once we get our knights leveled up and we're happy with a decent amount of hit points, a decent amount of mana points, more dexterity than this one, and as much strength and endurance as we can fit in addition to that, it's time to go fight some boars or some boks. Our role is not that different in the two fights. Main difference being that in the bok fight, the boss is directly in front of the knight, and therefore if we choose to, we can interrupt its channeling. Other than that, we generally want to start off the fight by prepping the front line, which is good news for the knight because all we can really do is attack the front line. And in order to do so, I will almost always pick Mighty Strike. It is reasonably low in mana, which is good because we don't often have a great mana pool. We are leveraging our strength in order to do additional damage and have the possibility to debuff physical defense by 25%, which is very nice. Next, I'm always going to pick for the king. It's a pretty strong buff, passive for the knight, on two things we really want, which is strength or endurance. And it sets up our tier 4 buff, Ironclad Defense. Tier 3 for the boars, I believe, is pretty easily Forever Vigilant. This is the most powerful of these three skills. We don't really want to rearrange the front two boars with Hold the Line and silencing the front boar so it can't nuzzle. I could construct a scenario where that works, but no real need. Dazing is just value. It helps the two people behind us not get dazed by opposing headbutts. And towards the end of the fight, when Mom is exhausted or channeling, it's very strong there as well. Next up, I already hinted that I really like Ironclad Defense. Especially in the boars, you take quite a lot of damage from position 2 and position 3, and we're using our endurance in order to get quite a big damage reduction effect. I think this is quite good. Then lastly, on my level 15 or higher knights, I always select Battle Ready. 5% block is more or less what you get from an Aegis amulet. So it is a significant amount. It's half what you get for carrying a shield. And your knight will usually be at the end of these fights doing basic attacks, so that 20% actually matters a lot if it's close. So that is actually 3 passive abilities I use on the knight, which is good because it means that a low MP pool doesn't devastate you as much. And since Mighty Strike and Forever Vigilant are so strong, I really just want to use all my MP doing that. Now I did say that we almost always use Mighty Strike. The time against the boars where I would actually load challenge is when I'm not fighting with a warrior who can taunt the mama boar and prevent rampages. You do considerably less damage with this sort of build. Hopefully you have at least one archer to pick up the slack since we're not loading Mighty Strike in this formation. Probably should have said this up front, but I just forgot. Hopefully it's pretty obvious. This is just how I build my characters. There are, of course, many ways to beat these hunts. I'm just going to be showcasing and talking about the 5 skills that I choose for each of the classes. And yeah, I don't think the knight is going to be that controversial. Maybe once I get into archer or priest or something like that, maybe there'll be more of a difference of opinions potentially. But hey, that's fine as long as you get the dub, who cares? Bad Mother Clucker, I do use the same 5 skills. Just wanted to take a brief moment and talk about how it is different than the boars. First and foremost, I will always do Mighty Strike on Bad Mother Clucker. Taunting for a warrior is pretty nice, but I'm never going to give up my knight's damage in order to do that with him. Forever Vigilant is a little bit interesting because I definitely experimented quite a lot at the start of Bad Mother Clucker, specifically with Iron Will, to deal with possible transformation via Ominous Entrance. But once I got better and better at the fight, it just came up so seldom that I would want this, where I'd just rather have the action economy of Forever Vigilant. You daze them, you gain half a turn, more or less. It can also interrupt an egg or a Mombok that is channeling, obviously. And actually, for that reason, I have stopped doing Shield Smash, which is pretty unplayable against the boars in my opinion. However, it is quite good against the boks because you have 2 chances to interrupt the Mombok. I stopped loading it though once I got better at the fight, Out of appreciation for ironclad defense, I'm taking a lot less damage from the chicks. And Forever Vigilant is just enough to do that. I don't need to have 2 ways to interrupt to the Mombach. Also, if Mombach happens to do a quick Mighty Gust, you kind of can't do this because you really screw yourself up if you move it to the mid row in that situation. I'm still on battle ready for tier 5. It's passive. This costs a ton of mana, means I'm not Mighty Striking, gets my archer maybe protected against confusion. Not good enough to beat the passive, in my opinion. Okay, I feel like I was repeating myself a little bit there. There's only so much to say about these skills. The Knight is not a complicated class. Attack the front line, don't die, get your 4 tiers and go home. No real need to try and reinvent the wheel and use any other skills in my opinion. But moving from the solved format of Void Hunts to a completely unknown format, Foon to launch PvP, I want to end all of these videos going through a couple of scenarios with the class to kind of illustrate what they can and can't do in a PvP situation and how they might contribute to a winning strategy. Let's look at this matchup for a second. I'm on the left with the Holy Trinity, Knight, Archer, Priest. I have the 5 skills loaded I just showed you. My Archer is kind of a precision build. My Priest, little healing, little nuking. And say we're up against a meta call that is doing very well. People are making YouTube videos about it. Warrior, Archer, Archer. It's very good in Void Hunts. It's probably going to be good in PvP. Say this is like the creme de la creme. What is our Knight doing? What does it need to do? What adjustments can we make? So they're going to have the quickness advantage with this build. I assume a common play pattern with this Warrior, Archer, Archer build would be to open up with small stones on my front 2 rows and then have the Warrior gruff my Priest so I can't heal. And follow that up next round with Focus Fire on whichever one of these 2 is closest to dead. Probably the Archer, considering it starts with less HP and has less armor. Though I suppose if you crit the Knight twice, you might as well try to snap it off. With my Priest coming off taunt just in time to see one of these 2 die. And behind 2 heroes to 3, I think I pretty much lose from there. So what are we going to do about it? Well, with the skills I have shown up here, my Knight has no choice but to attack the Warrior, so I'm going to try to use my Archer to also attack the Warrior. It'll be a little bit squishier than my Knight, but it could be wearing heavy armor, could be wearing a buckler and an Aegis. I don't know, maybe they picked that Warrior for a reason and that's not going to work. But we don't really have any other options with these skills. We have to Mighty Strike or Daze. If my Priest managed to save against the Gruff or it missed, we can also either Focus Fire or heal, which would be great. But I'm not sure how likely that is if it's a high strength Warrior. Let's see if we can improve our skills a little bit now that we're not in Void Hunts. Interestingly, our opponent is not hard-coded to attack certain places like Boars and Box, so if we have Ironclad defense active, they're probably not going to be small stoning my Knight and my Archer. Instead, they're going to small stone my Archer and Priest and go from there. I mean, sure, eventually they'll have to attack my Knight, but it might be 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 at that point and the game is already lost, so who cares? I think Shield Smash is the much better choice. I think it is the all-around most powerful skill a Knight has access to. If we're pumping strength like I recommend, we're going to have a decent chance to stun and gain action economy while doing damage, and a pretty good chance to move it back, and then we have a better option to maybe Focus Fire on an Archer instead of the Warrior. Problem is the Knight is slow, so our Archer is going to go before our Knight, probably, and he has to choose whether to attack the Warrior or the Archer, and then if we attack the Warrior and then the Knight moves the Warrior to the midline, now we have a full health Archer up front and a damaged Warrior in the middle. Next round, our Knight, hello, can only attack the first row again, and we have failed pretty hard at focusing fire. We could try loading Taunt instead of Mighty Strike, but let's see how that really works. We're going to be going towards the end of round 1. The Archers will have already rained down Hellfire on my front 2 heroes or my back 2 heroes, their choice, and their Warrior has probably already gruffed my Priest. So at this point, we could use our turn to challenge one of the 2 Archers, and maybe the other Archer can't finish off our Archer, for example, in time. Problem is, there went our damage. Even if we succeed in taunting an opposing Archer is saving our Archer, what are we really accomplishing in terms of doing damage? Maybe we can improve it by swapping out our healer so that we're not as vulnerable to gruff. Something like this, having lost to this Warrior Archer Archer cop a whole bunch of times, we decide to try something else and go heavy, heavy, light to combat their heavy, light, light composition. What does this do for me? They're still going to be a little bit quicker but less pronounced. But with this scenario, the Warrior gruffing one of the backline like my Archer is not really going to work out as well, because all 3 of my heroes can focus fire quite easily on this Warrior, and my Knight can contribute a Mighty Strike to that cause, doing its highest damage skill, and hopefully debuffing its physical defense for the next round of attacks by both my Archer and my Warrior. Whereas my opponent is going to be able to 2-on-1 my Archer if they choose, but 3-on-1 is better than 2-on-1 if my math is correct. So let's say we're successful in killing this Warrior. Opponent is using 2 of its weaker skills to single target this Archer to try to get it down. And then once I get them down a hero, I can either use potions to try to heal my Archer, or we can all focus fire on the front row again, giving up my archer for dead, but then shortly thereafter getting their archer because hopefully we get an attack with this archer before it dies, and basically we're able to focus fire better than they are in this scenario. That seems like a play pattern where Mighty Strike is very good, and in that hypothetical game, the ability to attack only the first row did not hurt me at all. But what if my opponent adjusts and brings in their own knight to kind of be a damage sponge and foil my strategy from last time to focus fire on their front line? Instead of this knight just being a warrior ineffectually attacking my knight, this guy could use a daze or a stun to deprive me of actions while the two archers focus on my one archer and are more successful. Getting the first kill, sure, eventually I will get their knight, but they're almost done killing this knight at this point, and then they get the 2-on-1 and win that scenario. So those are a couple of competitive PvP scenarios I see playing out. And going back to the beginning of this video, the knight's role is just to stand up front and be a deterrent. All very speculative, but I think whoever has the best matchup to get as many of their heroes taking on one hero and getting it off the board is going to have the advantage in this environment. But then again, maybe there are some alternate strategies which are going to stall out the game a little bit, or a lot bit, and I think the knight is part of that too. For example, what if we wake up one day, nothing to do, decide to build a defensive team? Maybe something like this on the left. Our warrior is able to defend our priest with Nuff. Our knight is able to defend our warrior with interception. How does that work exactly? Nobody knows, nobody cares. But presumably we don't take much damage, and then our priest heals a lot. They run out of resources trying and failing to kill us, and then we eventually basic attack them to death. I don't know if that'll work. I hope to God that won't work. I hate that I'm giving anybody ideas potentially. And yeah, I just bring this up to illustrate the fact that the knight does have more tools than I've talked about, such as tier 5 skills like Iron Shield and Royal Guard. I don't know how you afford to keep doing this with a limited mana pool, but theoretically it might be a strategy to use. So there are some possible scenarios where a knight could be used in PvP. I don't know if it'll be good or bad, probably somewhere in the middle if I had to guess. But let's take a quick moment to go over some strengths and weaknesses. The knight is going to be good in environments where they have to or choose to attack position 1, and where you choose to or have to attack their position 1. It is tough enough to absorb that punishment efficiently, and it has Mighty Strike, which is very good damage for both itself and its teammates. When your opponent is choosing to put a low endurance hero in the front line, either an archer or a berserker, or relatively speaking, a warrior, though they're not exactly low endurance, the knight is going to be able to more reliably land its action economy skills in the form of daze and stun. So when is the knight a problem? What are his potential weaknesses in a PvP environment? The main two problems I see are both related to agility. The good news is we don't have the high agility heroes unlocked yet, such as Thief, Monk to a lesser extent, certainly Ninja and Shapeshifter down the road. But if someone is choosing to put agility pants in the buff on his berserker, or emphasizing that on a warrior and putting it in the front row, or God help you, a channel archer with all that stuff, the knight's lack of accuracy is going to be much more punishing. Mighty Strike and Mist. Name a more iconic duo. Find somebody who loves you like Mighty Strike loves to miss, etc., etc. This problem will be compounded by evasion, as well as the knight's lack of speed, which I touched on a bit in some of the scenarios for PvP. We can plan to take a certain action on one of our first couple rounds, but if we're going last consistently, it may or may not still be effective. I don't think you should be putting any points into agility, because in order to do so, you put less points in dexterity, endurance, vitality. So it just is what it is. It's probably going to be going last, which I don't think it punishes you too much in this environment, but I'm going to be really curious to see once we get those ninjas and shapeshifters and we can face some really, really fast teams, just how embarrassing it is to bring like a knight or even a paladin or dark knight and just constantly get lapped in speed and miss them all the time. But we're not there yet, so it's not that big of a problem. So that was the knight. May you go forth with honor and slay the box, slay the boars, and eventually slay your friends. I think it will be an effective class. I am actively building knights. I'm happy to invest in legendary and mythics, use big stones, etc. That's all for now. I will see you and your best knights in the Colosseum.